Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Lay with Cascadia Composers, and we're presenting tonight Mark Pritchard on the topic of using plugins for Dorico and Sibelius. Thank you, Mark. Um, Take it away.
Sure. Yeah, glad to share about my experience, which is relatively limited. A couple of caveats. I've really only used plugins in Dorico. I was hoping that maybe someone would join who was familiar with the things in Sibelius. Um, all I really know is that Sibelius was reputed to be quite difficult to use plugins with, and Dorico had a better reputation with that, and so I decided to go with Dorico about a year and a half ago. Um, I'd like to ask what notation programs are you three using?
Well, I, for one, I'm using Dorico, Dorico
Mhm.
5.
How about
I
you, Connie?
I I'm using Finale, and I'm hoping to be using Dorico. Um, I'm trying to learn it. It's
Mhm.
I have so much on my plate right now that you know learning Dorico is but is very important because I'm going to lose Finale. So and I've been working with Finale since sometime in the mid 90s.
Mhm.
So
Well, hopefully this will help you get a little bit better understanding of Dorico.
I hope so. Yeah. I'm still teaching students. I teach them via Zoom, most of them, and piano students, and I have them compose and I use Finale, but now I really need to, and there is a free program of Dorico, I understand that, and I think, and two of my students have downloaded it, but uh, they need to be, if I'm going to be teaching them about composing, they need to know about Dorico, I think,
Mm.
not Finale.
Yeah, and there's a really well-priced cross grade from Finale that they're offering. So
Yes.
Liz, how about you?
I use Sibelius now, but I was a diehard Finale user from the very first one out. And until I did my composition degree at Montana, University of Montana, and the head of the department used Sibelius. And of course, being a Finale snob, I just laughed at him. But then he gave me a demonstration, and it seemed like there was one stroke of something in Sibelius to 5 strokes in Finale. So I says, forget it. I'm switching, and I did, and I've transferred everything over from to Sibelius from Finale
Mm.
long ago. But
Mhm.
I can't see myself doing Dorico. I might, but right now I've got, like Paula said, so much on my plate that um, I've got projects, composition projects that I want to get done. And so I'll probably continue on Sibelius and struggle through.
Yeah, well, you can at least get some information about the basics of plugins and what they are. You can use them in Sibelius as well. There's different terminology. Each application has its own terms for how to configure things to use plugins. And like in Sibelius, it's sound sets and playback configurations and so forth. And it seems to be a little more limited than what's available in Dorico. And but anyway, mainly I'm going to focus on Dorico because, like I said, that's where I have the experience, and but a lot of it would be applicable in terms of how the VST or the plugin interacts with the notation program once you have it configured. So yeah, I'll pull up my little outline here. So just starting with the basics. An audio plugin is basically a software component, a player, that plays samples or synthesizer. Synthesizers can be plugins, um, and they are made to give you the best possible playback. And plugins range from instruments to mixing modules. Like you can get equalizers, reverbs, all kinds of plugins that you can use in a mix. That's not been my focus so far. So far I've just been looking for better sounding instruments and more diverse instruments to use. So that's where my focus has been. So plugins, they can provide virtual playback from your score. And we've talked a little bit about NotePerformer in one of the other sessions that I attended. And that is itself a plugin that you can use with Sibelius or Dorico. And when I used Sibelius up until a couple of years ago, NotePerformer was my go-to way of getting playback. It just was so easy and sounded so much better than the stock Sibelius sounds. So I really highly recommend that. And then it can also generate, virtual instruments that are either unusual or rare. You wouldn't think to find a player who could play, certain Chinese or Japanese instruments, especially instruments around the world. I, for example, have an Omnisphere synthesizer that's an incredible synthesizer that I can plug into my scores, and that's what I've started doing lately. They're also going a step further, which is my latest piece that I'm working on now, uses phrase-based libraries, and it's a whole different game, really, because it has very little relationship to the notation that you're writing. The notation basically acts as triggers for these phrases. So it's a whole different world that I've entered in that respect. And you can also just create brand new sounds. I mean, go to your sound libraries, edit them, and so forth. So most plugins come in a free version that is simply a player of whatever libraries or instruments you might be able to play through them. And then there's usually a paid version that is more extensive, that allows a lot of editing. Perhaps it allows taking samples. For example, from Native Instruments, one of the most famous plugins is called Contact. And there's a Contact player and a Contact full version, which can do full-on sampling and have sample editing and all kinds of sound creation. So far I'm just using it to play back library sounds, so I'm just barely touching the potential that's there after a year and a half of study on it. It has been quite a learning curve for me. So there are several types of plugins. There are formats. One is called VST, probably the most popular. That stands for Virtual Studio Technology. That was invented by Steinberg, and it has become a near universal format. And then there's a format that's specific to Macintosh, to Apple, called AU. And then there is a format that's specific to, let's see, I have this, that's specific to Pro Tools. AAX is specific to Pro Tools. So most DAWs and notation programs can deal with VST, and if it's on a Macintosh, AU, Apple Audio Units by Apple. But VST is the most common format. It's become, like I said, nearly universal. It's in its third version now. I do have a link here to a Wikipedia article on it. Wikipedia is a great source, as always, for information about just about anything. So that's my basic intro. And do you have any questions or any particular yeah, questions that you would like answered or explore about plugins and how you might use them in a notation program generally?
So plugins, and I remember in Sibelius there were things that would do some manipulation of actual pitches. For example, I would give it a series, and it would invert, or different kinds of transformations on that. And I thought those were, and pitches and rhythms, units and doubling and halving, and those are what I was thinking were plugins. But that's not, and that's not what you're talking about so much. You're talking more about
Um,
sound plugins or
I mean,
samples,
those
or
things, those are basically functions in the application. You have these different things that the application has algorithms built in that can do that. Same as with Dorico. You have all kinds of transformation, and Dorico's even gone a step or two further than Sibelius in that realm, where you can do all kinds of manipulations to the notes you've already entered in there. Um, so no, that's not really a plugin, and in a little bit we'll get to looking in Dorico and seeing what the plugin is, and the play tab where you set things up. Um, so in most in applications, in both Sibelius and Dorico, you can set up the equivalent of a playback template, where when you start a project, it just takes that standard set of sounds that you're using and populates whatever instruments you've created in the score, and you don't really have to do much to get some kind of playback, right? So for a lot of folks, that's all they really need, because they're just counting on the performers to interpret, and they don't really need a great sounding mock-up. And as I mentioned in Sibelius, I used NotePerformer for that rather than the standard Sibelius sound set, because it was just so great, such a big improvement. With Dorico, the standard default is using a player that's called Halion Sonic. And they have a couple of libraries that are sitting and that come along with Dorico. So I think my first demonstration will be to show you what it's like to create a new piece that just populates from the standard Dorico default plugins. So it uses plugins just even as a default. There's really no standard built-in sound set. It always has to use plugins to be able to produce sounds. So let's create this new project. And then we have these tabs up here to do different things in Dorico. In the play tab is where you set up the sounds. So you have all of your instruments that are in this standard classical orchestra setup, and each instrument has a track inspector section where you can see what's been set up. So you can see Halion Sonic is the name of the VST plugin that's being used to produce sound for the flute, and it has an expression map associated with it called Iconica Sketch Piccolo Flute. So we'll get into expression maps in a little bit. And if you click on this E, you can see what the instrument looks like, supposedly. Where is that? Not sure why it didn't come up from clicking that E, but this is the plugin for Halion Sonic, and this is how it's populated the different instruments for the classical orchestra. And this is the libraries that it's drawing from. to do that. And down at the bottom you have a keyboard where you can sample whatever sound is selected. Right? Well, I guess we don't have sound coming out yet from this. Interesting. Oh, there we go. I don't know if you can hear that very well, but this is how you can sample the instruments in the VST to see, well, do I like them or not? Am I going to change them to something else? You can always be able to sample them that way and hear the sound. And yeah, so over on this side, you can see that it's created this one. It has VST and MIDI. So this is where you select a module to connect, like a plug-in to connect to Dorico. In this case, it only has this one plug-in, one instance it's called. You can of course have multiple instances, as they're called, or different implementations of the same plug-in. Maybe you want to just have a certain expression map for a certain group of instruments, and you create a plug-in instance for that. And you create a plug-in instance for maybe the woodwinds or another family group that you think you can handle in one expression map. So that's where you see the list of plugins that are involved in this project. And back to the track inspector, we can see each instrument, and they're assigned a MIDI channel, and they are all assigned to this same instance of the plugin, and they all have so far this similar expression map. You can see if you click here, there's all kinds of expression maps that come with Dorico that you can choose from. And those are related to the standard libraries that come with Dorico. So all of that's been done automatically behind the scenes. Violins have a separate expression map for the violins. Iconica sketch violins, violas, cellos. The other aspect here is an endpoint setup, they call it. And here you can see the MIDI channels that are assigned to each instrument and which expression map the instrument has. So that's sort of an overall mapping of what's going on with all the instruments in the project, or all the instruments for this particular plug-in instance. So that's a lot of terminology and a lot of stuff right off the bat. Any questions so far about the meaning of that, or anything I tried to explain?
I feel a little unclear on the expression map, what that's for exactly. Is that...
Okay, let's go to my notes here, and maybe it's time to go through these terms to understand. So these are sort of the basic building blocks of understanding about how you can configure custom sounds in Dorico. So we saw the sound libraries that were part of the plug-in instance that we had. That's a collection of sampled or synthesized sounds that you can choose from to represent instruments in your score. There are key switches in that sound library that are used to switch between different articulations or to different sound sets. So those are kind of a trigger, if you will, they play a role in the expression map. The playback template is what Dorico used to create this orchestra score. So they used a playback template that's just their stock default template for the Halion Sonic plugin using the libraries that come with Dorico. Then there's a playback technique, it's called. So that's a definition of something that you want to have differentiated in your score in the way the instrument sounds, the way it's played back. So it might be something like a marcato, or it could be a particular sound from a synthesizer, or it could be, and it can apply to a single note, like an accent marking, or it can be an ongoing change, like an arco. Those are two, very common playback techniques that are already existing in Dorico. It has a large library of playback techniques to choose from. I've been having to create my own since I'm getting into unusual instruments. Then there's a playing technique. So these are kind of very close in sound and terminology, but they're quite different. The playing technique is a symbolic representation of a playback technique that you can put into your score to trigger that playback technique. So that might be like the word arco, or the PIZZ period that triggers the pizzicato sound. And so that's telling Dorico, use this playback technique on this note or this series of notes. So you have to create playing techniques if you want to represent something with symbols in your score. Then we come to the expression map. So that's where you map out all of the different kinds of expression or playback techniques that you want to trigger in your score. So, of course, all the standard string techniques will be pre-existing in Dorico, and you can see how those are mapped. If you looked at an expression map, we'll look at one in a minute. You can trigger some kind of difference in sound with a program change, and that's a MIDI term, meaning you're sending a MIDI program change to change the sound that's happening for that MIDI channel. Or it can be a MIDI channel change, like in one of my synthesizer setups, I have 8 different sounds and each on a different MIDI channel. And when I switch sounds, I've created playback techniques and playing techniques that trigger a change in MIDI channel and thereby a change in the synthesizer patch that's being used and the sound that's produced. Or it can be a key switch, this other term that we just went through, where it triggers, in many libraries you use key switches to trigger between things like portamento or arco and pizzicato and so forth. And so you would specify a key switch produces this particular playback technique. There's also something called percussion maps. So once you get into percussion and you want to use a group of percussion instruments, perhaps create a percussion kit, then you need to create a percussion map that maps a series of instruments, percussion instruments, to specific notes. Usually in the libraries you have a range of instruments across the whole keyboard span, and you're picking out notes for the particular instruments you want to sound in your score, and you're making a percussion map to map those particular notes to those particular sounds, so that when you play them back in your score, they get the right sounds in your percussion. And then the endpoint, which we briefly saw one of, that just represents the sound setup for an instrument or a collection of instruments for one of the plug-in instances that is working in your score. So, gosh, I tell you, it took me months to understand all these terms and how they interact, so I totally get that it's a little bit overwhelming and not that easy to understand. Any particular questions before we go look at an expression map and take a look at how it's organized? Okay.
I think we'll have to hear this whole thing 5 times, maybe, or 10.
Yeah.
Before we have the questions even.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's look at one of these percussion or expression maps. In this library drop down, We have access to expression maps, percussion maps, playing techniques, playback techniques, all these things that we've talked about. So let's look at an expression map. Let's say the violins. See what that looks like. So these are the switches, and these are the playback techniques that are being triggered. We want, for pizzicato, we're looking at a key switch, C-sharp 0. So these key switches are usually placed out of the range of the sounding range of the instrument. So, you know, you're pressing, Dorico is sending these notes, signals, to the plug-in to say, switch to pizzicato now. And of course it doesn't affect the sound because it's outside the range of the instrument, and it's, you know, way down at the bottom or way up at the top. And then spiccato, that's mapped to B flat 1. And staccato, another key switch. All of these are mapped to key switches, it looks like. So that means their library depends heavily on these key switches to switch between different types of expression. Now you can add an absolute channel change action. That's what I was talking about, the MIDI channel change for my synthesizer multis, where I want to switch between synthesizer sounds. Or a relative channel, like move up one MIDI channel, move down one MIDI channel. Here's the key switch, or a program change, or actually a control change action. So controllers, if you know, you really need to be familiar with MIDI to some degree. I presume most of you are. Controllers in MIDI, you know, control all kinds of different parameters for your sound, and they can be used here to trigger different effects and sounds. Over here you specify what's going to affect the volume for this particular effect. And they default it to just saying, well, it's the controller change 1, which is the mod wheel. That's not what I usually use. Usually I would say, well, let's see. Usually I would say, let's start with note velocity. You know, what are you putting for the velocity? Piano, mezzo piano, forte. That's the note on velocity in MIDI terms. And then I would use a secondary dynamic, and that would control the change in dynamic after the initial note has gone on. And that's the standard for me is to use 7, which is like the old volume pedal when I'm using my electronic keyboard, is always set to 7, controller 7. So that way I would get response to the changes that happen with hairpins and so forth, and other dynamic indications. So that's what an expression map looks like. You're mapping these different types, expressive techniques, playback techniques, to these kinds of switches, and also specifying how the volume is affected by different controllers. There's more to it, but those are the basics. These playback option overrides and mutual exclusion groups, I haven't even needed to get into those yet. I will explore those in the future, but if you could just get this base and add-on switches area understood, that's the basics. Up here is a section where you name it. You can choose to alter the pitch bend range or have microtonal playback, or they have what they call a stage template setting, which is basically like a kind of a reverb type setting, if you will. It just sort of sets a stage, a stage presence for your sound stage. So that's what this top section is about, is the basics. But this is the meat of it right here. Any questions on that so far?
That's very helpful, though. Thank you.
Yeah. So we also talked about these playback techniques. So these are pretty simple. They're basically just like a name, Bartok snap pizzicato. The fallback is normal pizzicato. If the sound set doesn't have a Bartok snap, then okay, we'll just do regular pizzicato. It's an attribute, which means it only applies to the note that it appears above or next to. If it was a direction, that would mean it's an ongoing effect, like arco, where you play arco until otherwise told, right? So that's called a direction here. And that's it. I mean, you can see there's an extensive library of all of these different effects or different playback techniques, including percussion and various things, whistle tone, zing. Some of them I don't have any idea what they actually are, what a zing is, what a zing fast or slow is. Who knows? I haven't even touched it yet. But there's plenty to play with, or like in my case, I had to create new ones because, like I say, I'm using instruments that are not, are very unusual non-Western instruments. So that's playback techniques. This is basically giving something a name that it can relate to. And then playing techniques, it's a little more complicated. So this is where you get into, let's see, what should we do? Marcato. So this is, for example, this is what you would write in the score to trigger this playback technique. Or for harmonic, there's our little circle for the harmonic. So that's the symbol that you would put in the score to trigger the playback technique of natural harmonic 1. So this is where you choose the playback technique that you either choose from the existing list, or maybe you created a special one back when we were in playback techniques. And then you have a choice, do I show it in cues or not? The default placement is above or below. It's a type, it's a glyph. You can also choose to make a text representation if you prefer. And the category. You have these different categories to make it easy to find in your score, to find this thing at the right side to trigger this expression. That's what these categories are for.
Mark, can I ask a question? Did I understand you to say that you have to do this manually with Dorico? That Dorico doesn't have a sound library, and this what you're doing with, do you do this with each piece before you start writing, or?
Dorico does have default standard sound libraries,
Okay.
but they're not like Sibelius where it's just built in, and it adopts a VST plugin called Halion Sonic. That's the Steinberg version of a sample player, and so that it will automatically use. I'll show you in a moment. So we talked about playback. Where is it? Options, layout options. Here we go. Playback template in the play menu. So it has used it looks like it's used this playback template, and all of these you see here except for NotePerformer and this one that I created for my sonata are standard with Dorico. Allianz Sonic selection, this one, all of these will include different libraries and will automatically be applied. And if you want to change it, like let's say you've created a default score here and you decided, oh, I want to see what it sounds like in NotePerformer, and you just select that one, apply and close, which I'll do here. Now we just saw that over at the left here, this changed to NotePerformer. It reassigned everything to NotePerformer instruments. So now over in VST and MIDI, you see we have an instance for NotePerformer. And it took the place of the Halion Sonic because we wanted to try that different playback template. So yeah, in Liz they have, looks like about a dozen different playback templates that you could choose to operate with on opening a score. And I think you select one of them as a default. I don't tend to use playback templates very much because I am now into just creating, finding the best sounds I can in my libraries and using those, and most of them are better than the standard libraries that came with Dorico. So I'm not really using the playback templates. I found them to be problematic if I wanted to start substituting instrument by instrument, different VSTs. It became complicated and sometimes would react in ways that were unpredictable. But it does have that automatic feature and a lot of choice within that feature to automatically populate this Halion Sonic plugin with its associated libraries. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and do you set up everything before you start writing a piece, or does it change as you're writing? And
Well, I guess that depends on how you feel about it and what your particular approach is. When I did my sonata for piano and percussion, I started with NotePerformer just to see how well it could do. And I started composing, and I was like blazing away with the composing and becoming more and more dissatisfied. And then I went through a process of making some substitutions for, now I want this VST for my percussion kit because it's not even able to play tempo blocks. So, if I want tempo blocks, I've got to go get them from my external library and create a VST instance for it. And so I did that. Okay, now I have tempo blocks that I can compose with because I got to this section that depends on tempo blocks, and so that piece was sort of a mix. I started out with one of my standard approaches and then gradually modified it, and that turned into be kind of a complex thing. Then after I got the whole piece composed, I went back again and thought about every instrument and could I get a better version of that from an external library, and the answer was yes in many cases. So I ended up with a mix of NotePerformer and a number of other things going on. So that's one kind of process, start with the basics and then fine tune it as you go. I've now gone into now that I understand VSTs more and I want to compose with the sounds that are as good as possible, I end up setting it up in advance. So in my newest piece, I have spent now about 2 weeks just setting it up, sounds. And so that gets me to a point, and I'm just now, let's look at the sonata for piano and percussion, and I'll show you this sort of mix of things that I ended up with. Wow, we're already 45 minutes into it. Yeah, so as you can see, it's quite an extensive setup of percussion, including crotales and wood blocks, tempo blocks, Now here come the VSTs. So you open up a project and you look at the score and then you wait for all the VSTs to open up. So here is Cineperk. This is the percussion library I mentioned earlier. And I found it to be really a great library. This is an instance just for crotales. And I have NotePerformer still participating. And another contact instance with more percussion from various sources. Like you can mix in this one VST instance, I probably have 3 or 4 different percussion libraries for, one for each instrument. When I was looking in this piece, I needed 5 different suspended cymbal sounds. And that was really the most difficult of anything to come up with. I had to hunt and hunt and hunt to find cymbal sounds that represented the best splash cymbal, the best sizzle cymbal, and then 3 different sizes of regular suspended cymbals. So I finally did end up getting something that's close, close enough, but that was quite difficult. So that's what this instance does. Then here are the tempo blocks that I added, and more cymbals. Again, more cymbals, and I did a separate instance for each player. Like I have 3 percussionists in this piece, and each one has a percussion kit plus accessory instruments. So again, it's like really heavy on percussion. And there we have finger cymbals, claves, mark tree, blah, 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 blah. So if we go to the play tab here, you just see in the VST and MIDI, there are all the different VST instances that I have working in this piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different. So, and then if you go down through here and look at the track inspector, you'll see which one. So piano, NotePerformer did okay on piano, so I just left it on piano. Glockenspiel, same thing. NotePerformer was okay. Same thing for chimes. Percussion 1, okay, now we're in contact because I couldn't get the cymbals. Timpani is NotePerformer. Actually, each instrument for the percussion player you can put into a different instance, a different VST. Crotales has its own contact instance, and so forth. So all the way down through the 3 percussionists, and then the vibraphone is still... What happened to the vibraphone? That should show NotePerformer. Oh, I see. It has 2 voices in it, and they're both NotePerformer. So what happened there is that I wanted a bowed vibraphone sound and a normal vibraphone sound. And the way to get that in NotePerformer was to have 2 different voices that were triggered in Dorico. There's a function where you can designate one as voice 1 or voice 2, and then in the NotePerformer mixer, where is that? Yeah, so I have a vibraphone bowed channel in the mixer and a vibraphone regular. So that's why I had to do two different MIDI channels for NotePerformer vibraphone. So that is a pretty...
Just a quick question. Is this what we're looking at now? Is this what's called a mock-up?
Well, the mock-up, I guess, is a term for the sound that comes out. You know, when you've recorded the sound that comes out of it, that would be the mock-up, right? You know, the sounding of your score, however that plays out. Now, to get the sound out of here, there's an export function, of course, and you know, you just choose audio and choose where to export it and which they call different sections, they call flows. A movement in Dorico is a flow. And so these are all the sections to the piece. So you would export it, and then that would become your mock-up, quote unquote, the sound file that you can play back. But this is where that is all set up in terms of what sounds are going to play back. So
Mark,
let's.
Oh.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. It's more on the score side. The playing techniques that you specify. You know, you attach to a note. Say, do you use in Dorico, like if it's a text sort of, simple like Mercado was an example before. Would you use just I think it's Shift X to, and you would type Mercado into that and that would be enough to trigger the playback?
Yeah. So part of what you set up when you do a playing technique is what appears in the pop-up window. So the pop-up window is one way to input a technique, but you can also do it in this right-hand panel here. So like in unpitched percussion, you see all of these symbols, and they all have a meaning in terms of, and like some of these I adopted or created myself to, so like here's one in here for a cymbal scrape, this circle with an arrow in it. Mm-hmm. And you can access that by clicking on the symbol over here, or there's also, you can do it via pop-up. And I don't use the pop-ups all that much. I'm a kind of a mouse-centered kind of a guy. So I use the symbols, and I'm using my mouse all the time to enter stuff, and I've been told that that's kind of a painstaking way to do it, but that's the way I do it most of the time. But yeah, you can use the pop-ups, and in that playing technique you specify what is the text that I will put to trigger that technique, and put the symbol in here.
Could you go through an example just that you would erase right away? I mean, it's something that wouldn't stick, and just to show me how that pop-up works.
Yeah, okay, so there's a timpani note. Let's see. So we go to the keyboard and articulations, and there's the pop-up. I see I'm not familiar with the pop-ups very well, so I'm not even sure what to type in there to get something.
I see.
You type the first few letters, and it'll show you some options. You can go down like that, and
I see. So you use the pop-ups and not the regular add text sort of thing with a Shift X.
Oh yeah, add text doesn't do anything for expression.
I see. Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I did this stick end yarn of mallet. That's just pure text.
Yeah.
And it does not, it's an instruction for the player, but it doesn't do anything to the sound. It's just text.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a little respite here, and I will play something. That would be kind of fun to play. Maybe I'll do that. Although it's not that loud. I know it's loud. Drum section. These have 4 movements with these interludes that are pure unpitched. So let's see what that sounds like. These are the drums that Oh, wait, hold on a second. No. I did something wrong there. Okay. So there's the drums that came out of that. And here's a sample of like the sort of more exotic sounding parts where I have the chimes and the grotales and a bit of piano inside the piano. There's a sample of, you know, what I did with all those different 7 VSTs.
That sounded wonderful.
Yeah, I got from the people I've shared it with, I've gotten some really nice comments about how good the sounds are. Of course, there are some things that you just cannot get, like I've specified cymbals on the timpani, you know, which is an incredible sound,
Yeah.
but it's not in any sound library that I could find, and you know, so I just had to go with a combination of the cymbal sound and the timpani sound together, and oh well, you know. One day I hope to have it performed and actually hear the way it's supposed to sound in that aspect. So let's see where to go from here. The next step that I took on this, well actually the next piece I went composed was this solo for a flute and alto voice. Then there was a string quartet for this Delgani competition. And that just was so easy. I mean, NotePerformer does an okay job with strings, and I just let NotePerformer do its thing for the string quartet. So there was no setup there, it was just super easy. And then I thought, well, gosh, it's getting so hard to get performances, especially of these long pieces that I'm creating. To get a full performance of a 4 or 5 minute movement work is just really tough. So I think I'm going to start composing go back to my roots with synthesizers, which I was heavily involved with in the 80s and 90s, and start combining synthesizers with regular instruments. So, and this first one that I did like that, Moonstar Rising, has a set of instruments that could be played along with a tape of the synthesized sounds. So that was sort of an intermediate step for me. A pretty simple setup. Here come the VSTs. It's got Omnisphere in it. It's got more contact instances with percussion. It's got an ethereal earth synthesizer from Contact. Got NotePerformer in it. And this Glass Bells in Space sound from my Omnisphere. So these are all contributing sound here. So my thought on this piece was that, well, let's see, got a synthesizer bass, 2 synthesizer sounds, and a flute, percussion, and piano. So I'm figuring, well, it could be a trio, and they could perform these and have the synth bass is sort of the metronome, if you will, for the rest of the group, and you could make a tape of these 3 parts, and then these 3 could play along with it. So that was my thought for this piece. And you can see in the play area, again, we go into here, we can see how all the instruments are configured. NotePerformer, Omnisphere, 2 instances of contact for percussion. And you can see how each instrument is allocated. Again, I have the vibraphone with the 2 voices to get bowed vibe in there. Percussion. Oh, it should be in the track inspector to look at that. So you can see you have the NotePerformer there, contact there, etc. So you look at each track and see what's assigned to it. Any questions about this different approach of incorporating some synthesizers? Down at the bottom we see that's the contact one, this is the Omnisphere one, and actually I use NotePerformer for the synth bass. This is more like an electric bass, just a plain old electric bass. Now in Dorico, when you're in this play mode, you also have the mixer down here. You can also have that happening in the right mode, which is kind of nice sometimes if you're trying to balance things out and you're looking at the score going along. You can have the mixer at the bottom as well. So that was my sort of second step into the world of plugins and VST, was introducing synthesizers into the score. And I guess I could play a little bit of this one if you like. See, a little place that has more action in it. Starts out quite softly and sort of builds and builds. yeah, so
Wonderful.
yeah, I'm enjoying that. The synthesizer layered on top of the other stuff is, I was really happy with how that was turning out. So then thought, well, gosh, I feel like getting even more adventurous now. And I'm going to go ahead and just write whatever collection of ethnic instruments or other instruments that I want together, regardless of practicality. Like, throw practicality out the window. Who cares if you could ever get a group of players together with this group of instruments? It's like, so it was kind of liberating to think that way, because all these years I've thought about the practical aspect of performance, and wow, I could never get that group of players together, so I'm just not going to write for it, or similar thoughts. But so that brought on this piece called Full Moon Dance. So I kind of went crazy there and added, a whole bunch of instruments together that I could just play with and create sound textures that I just, would probably never hear in the real world. So I haven't even bothered to, put a title page or a performance setup, because I don't expect this to ever be performed. I don't know, I mean, if you could ever manage to get this group together, that would be quite a feat. You'd have to get famous first, and I don't really contemplate that's going to happen for me. So here come the VSTs again: NotePerformer, Halion Sonic, Contact 7, all these different libraries to choose from. A lot of different percussion here: Mark Tree, ankle, seed rattle. I've got a sort of a seed rattle shaker in there. Doumbek for drums, congas, Bodhran, that's a kind of a low-pitched drum from India, gongs and tam-tam, and you're just like, wow, go nuts, And another plug-in that I have, Musio, is a really interesting thing that you could maybe think about getting, because this is made by the same company that makes Cineperk, and they have this project going where they want to put all their libraries out in the cloud online, and for one subscription price, I paid $200, and I got access to dozens of incredible libraries at no further cost, with this free plug-in to play them. And so anyway, I found these handbells that are really, really cool sounding. So I just created this plug-in just to do those. And on my Omnisphere again, this time with a big bass sound. And here you can see where I guess I didn't do it in this way, and I only have one bass sound there. It's like in my next one, where I've got a full palette of 8 different sounds in one plug-in. Yeah, so here I have, a synthesizer, a lead synthesizer, a synth bass, and then harp, electric piano, celesta, a percussion kit, large gong, Bodhran, shaker, Mark Tree, vibraphone, hammered dulcimer. How many hammered dulcimer players do you know? Handbells, gonna get a little handbell choir together up on stage? No, I don't think so. And my favorite flute, because I'm a flute player. I love flute. Yeah, so all of this stuff, and then I just went to town, and boy, that was really fun. So, that kind of like illustrates what you can do with VSTs. It goes beyond the norm.
Will you play for us?
Pardon?
Will you play it?
Yeah, I can play some of it. Let's see, maybe I'll get to an area that's a little more active. This piece is about 12 minutes and 12 and a half minutes long, so I have to think about what selection. Okay, let's start in here. How was the volume last time? Was that too loud or too soft or about right? Okay. Yeah, so that's a sampling. It goes these active sections with little interludes of in between. Yeah, that was really fun, and
Very
sort of
nice.
opened up a whole world of sound that I haven't been with for decades. So I'm enjoying that. If I manage to turn my camera around, you could see that I have. Maybe I'll see if I can show you. Actually, you're not seeing my camera very much right now, but I have like 4 different racks full of synthesizers, old hardware synthesizers off to the side next to my electric keyboard. And I had thought I would be using those, but here I am using everything inside my computer. That's pretty amazing. Took me a while to make that transition, but I hope to incorporate some of the old synthesizers, the hardware, back into the mix, which you can easily do. Like that's what it means in the play when you see VST and MIDI, add a MIDI instrument. I don't have any of them turned on right now, so you wouldn't be able to see them, but you can add, your hardware MIDI instruments into the mix as well. Now, some of the things that we saw in the score there, if I go back a ways, some of the things we were listening to, you can see a bunch of symbols and how they, oh, that's too far. So, for example, in the drum parts, this sort of big asterisk here is a different kind of a hit on the drum. And I basically chose that symbol, created the playback technique to trigger that particular note in the percussion via a percussion map and playing playback techniques. So you can hear the different drum sounds that are triggered by that playback, that playing technique. That's reference to a playback technique. That's referenced back to a percussion map that goes to that sound library to tell it to play that different key and not that one to make that different sound. So that's part of the magic of VSTs, is triggering those different intricacies of the percussion sounds to make it sound more like a real human is playing that stuff. And then here, this is also a playing technique that I created for keyboard. So I have a bunch of these 2-letter and 3-letter abbreviations that stand for different synthesizer sounds. Like this one's the bass fat. That's this really thick bass sound here. And that's triggered by putting an FFF in the score. See, right there. That means switch the sound to that really thick, nice sounding electric bass away from this other more mushy bass sound that was more synthy. So that's how I'm switching between synth sounds, is by using this playing technique, which plays back to a playback technique that I had to create custom and named it for that particular synth sound, and that is changed by changing the MIDI channel of this track to address the sound in the VST that has that same MIDI channel. Let's see if we can find a couple more examples here. Here I'm introducing this new lead synth sound that's coming in. TP stands for Tesla pad. So that was the Tesla. That's the name of the pad that I was using to create this lead sound that came in the middle of this percussion section. So those are a couple of examples of how I triggered different sounds and got different variations of the percussion playback to happen. And if we took a look at one of the percussion maps for this. So in this case, like I named a percussion map for each instrument, and let's say the dumbek, for example. So for each percussion instrument, I mapped out these different techniques which map to different sounds in the sound library and give them a name. This is like a rim shot. This is a flam. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. This one's a drag. Ba-bum, ba-bum. And so forth, the roll. So those are all tied to this particular note name, and this is the instrument, and this is the playback technique that it's tied to. So there's an example of a percussion map, and it, checked it's for multiple instruments, not just a single instrument. And some of these, like this is the shaker one, this is just a single instrument. I only have one sound for it, call it the natural sound, the way it's normally played, and that's it. But it still has to map to this particular key in the library, which had the best shaker sound that I wanted to use in that particular library, which had like dozens of shaker sounds in it. And congas, again, multiple instruments. I had a quinta and a tumba conga, and these different playback techniques: drag, natural, flam, roll, slap, roll, for the high and low congas, all in one percussion map. Now if we go back to the play and look at that percussion map, let's say we go to Dumbek High, and we can see it has that percussion map associated with it. If we go to the endpoint, you see it lists out the different percussion maps that are associated with each instrument, the expression maps that are being used. For percussion, I just created an expression map that makes sure that the dynamics are played back the way I want to. Because remember, there was that section at the right part of the expression map where you specify how dynamics are affected. And then the assigned instruments and the MIDI channels. So that's my endpoint setup for that percussion kit. It has the congas and doumbeks and a shaker and a mark tree. Actually, the shaker is on a separate line, not in the kit. That gets actually into the setup tab where, when that's actually part of the setup really is looking at how you're going to, what different players are you going to have. So Dorico is organized by players rather than staves. Sibelius is really organized more by staves, and then you have to group the staves into parts, and it's rather complex. I like the Dorico approach where you over here you have your full score and then all the parts that are happening for it, and you can combine these parts and customize these parts in any way you want, but they're organized around players here on the left side. So anybody that you figure you want a separate player for, which in my mind means like I want them present in the score so that I can see them all the time and compose with them if I want. Later on I could perhaps combine them into a part if I want to, or if the vibraphone is going to play the hammered dulcimer as well, then that could become like an instrument change on that staff. But I chose to keep them separate because there's times when I want them both playing and I want them to write independent voices easily for them, so I tend to keep the players isolated to what I want to compose with for each player. Yeah, and here's a bunch of these other symbols where I've got this percussion sound happening. So yeah, that's probably my most complex plug-in setup so far. Any questions about that, or comments, or anything?
I appreciate how you've presented this in a way of more complex and more complex, as
Yes.
you've gone along. I think I learned quite a lot from tonight's presentation. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're certainly welcome.
I did also. Thank you very much. I have a couple questions not related to the score, but first of all, did I hear you say at one time you have a different job other than, is this your hobby? Or
Yeah, I don't make money from music, so yeah, it's not my day gig, if you will. my day gig is as a business analyst for a small software company. So I do testing and requirements gathering and so forth for a small software firm in Olympia. And I've done that kind of work since like about 2008 or so. Yeah, so music has, I mean, I have my degrees and everything, but at a certain point I made a decision that I didn't want to stay around the academic circle. I wanted to go more broadly, and so I was actually in Los Angeles when I was doing my education, so I decided I started a nonprofit there called Multi-Arts Group Network, and started gathering other composers around and dancers and visual artists, and my master's is from Cal Arts, which is a school where all the arts are combined together, and my vision was to create a group that would create multimedia pieces for performance. However, then I fell in love with a dancer and ended up moving to New York City, and she wanted to join a dance group there, and so then I composed for dance for free for 10 years or so for her group and others, and did occasional performances and so forth. But I never got into a position where I was teaching for money or where I was making any kind of money really with music. So I guess you could call me an amateur, but I consider myself to be professional level in terms of skill and technique.
No amateur, not at all. I'm very impressed. Now, my second question is just related to this presentation. We had some emails going back and forth about how you were going to work the sound. How did you decide to do it?
Well, I'm just playing the sound through my studio speakers, and I've got the original sound for musicians turned on. With that turned off, when I was testing on Sunday, if I turned that off, it became really sporadic, and the auto filtering and limiting and so forth that happens with the automatic zoom mode, it just is not conducive to music. So anyway, that's why they created this original sound for musicians mode, where you just go back to naked sound basically. And so that's what I'm using. It's going through my studio speakers and into my little stereo microphone that's part of my video camera, and onto you. I was a little fearful that it would create feedback, but somehow it doesn't. I don't really understand that, because it seems like it might, but it seems to work fine. I'm listening to your voices also through my studio speakers. I tried using the share sound button on the right hand side of the share screen, thinking that might help me play directly from the score and get the music that's streaming through my computer to sound directly, but it never was successful at that. I don't know what that actually is supposed to do, but it didn't seem to do anything. I couldn't get it to be heard that way.
Okay. Well, that's good to know if somebody else has these questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because when I teach, I use the shared sound and it works fine. But I don't have as complex a setup as you do, and there must be some reason that it doesn't work for you.
So you're playing music through an application on your computer?
Finale, I'll have Finale up, and one of the students has written something in Finale, and we'll play it back. And I play Finale when I'm just zooming with people. I might play something from Finale that I'm working on for them, and that always seems to work. But it's much, what you're doing is much more complex, and I don't know whether it has to. I can't imagine that it has to do with the difference between Dorico and Finale, though. But who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. It might have to do with the sound interface that I have, or because I have a number of selections for sound source, and the sound source selected is my sound interface that channels sound to my speakers and to my mixer. So, and I tried others, but none of my sound sources actually works. But it might have to do with the internal configuration of the computer. Do you have a Mac or Windows?
Windows.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't know. I'll do more research on it and see if I can figure it out, because it'd be nice to be able to just play from the score without going through the speakers.
Yes, it's surprising you didn't get feedback too.
Hmm.
Yeah. But the sound was great.
Yes, it was
No, that's good.
very wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I'm,
You're
I'm going
welcome.
to have to I'm going to have to sign off, but uh, I think we could go on for an hour or more. You have so much knowledge, but I think maybe you should do the second session coming
Well,
up.
I really have a lot more to teach about it. As a parting thing, I'll play a little bit of this piece that I'm working on now, which is it's like one more slightly different approach, where you see all of these whole notes, and each of these whole notes is triggering a phrase. So I've got this laid out so that I can sample the phrases that are happening in these different libraries, vocal, and in the vocal sounds. So this piece is all about voices, and like I've got Tuvan drones in this Omnisphere instance, and here I've got a bunch of sort of voice-like synthesizer sounds. Again, this one I have the entire multi filled up with 8 different choices of sounds that I could produce in this piece. And again, some percussion coming from Stinaperk, and then some Zurna, Ney, Pipa, and Yankin, these Eastern instruments that I don't think we'll find any players around here for. Again, an exploration into just the world of world music, which I have loved and have loved ever since Cal Arts, when I took gamelan and Indian music classes. Again, percussion, and here we have this ethnic vocal phrases. We have this beautiful lady who has sung Middle Eastern with her Middle Eastern vocal techniques, something like a couple of hundred different phrases that you can trigger with different notes. And here on the keyboard you see laid out, these are middle parts, short endings. This is openings. So you patch together an opening with a middle part with an ending to create a phrase, a longer phrase. And these are like, each one is a like that. And then I have another library that's all Mongolian voices, and that is pretty amazing as well. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing I'm working with in here. Got all of these percussion instruments and these melodic instruments on top, and the voices, the main voices here, and a group of synthesizers down here. And I've set it out so I can like listen to each one of these, and it goes through all of the possible phrases. And right now I'm in a phase of trying to listen to it and understand, like, of these hundreds of phrases, which ones am I going to piece together to make this music. So it's in a very preliminary phase, but I'll play the first couple bars so you can hear the combined effect of all of them.
Wow.
Pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
That is amazing. And did you play into the keyboard each of these phrases, or did you record them and then?
These phrases is in the library. It's been recorded by a
Oh, okay.
company that produced a sampling library
Oh my
with
goodness.
phrases in it. And so each of these notes is triggering one of those phrases.
Yes. Okay. I wondered where the phrases themselves came from. How? Yeah. Oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for including the phrase stuff. It's
Yes.
all very new to me. Appreciate it.
That's a whole nother world, isn't it? My
Yep.
gosh.
Yeah. So I'm going to be working on this while I work on my next couple of performance. Really, I'm actually going to keep writing performance for real humans, but yeah, I'm planning to do the percussion duo score call that's coming up, and
Um,
the horn quartet as well.
yeah. Only so much time, boy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. This has been wonderful.
Very well.
And
Yep. Enjoy.
maybe we can get a Mark Pritchard uh, second session coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Like I said, I'm not sure how much more I have to share. I've pretty much shared it all, but I'd be happy to if people are interested. It didn't seem like a high level of interest, so I'm not sure it'd be worth
Well,
doing another one.
you never know with this. I mean, there are people who are usually here all the time that have other things. Something comes up or whatever. But like I say, they usually so many people get the um, the recording and listen later. So
Yeah, I'm
Could
going to
be the
listen to
Christmas
David's
holidays.
Horns recording as soon as I can, so I can get ideas for that piece.
yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'd better sign off
Okay.
and
Thank you,
okay.
Mark. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Bye
Appreciate it.
bye.
Bye bye.
I'm going to stop the recording here.